May 1941. The North Atlantic is not just an ocean, it is a lifeline for Great Britain. Every day, merchant convoys carry the food, oil, and steel that keeps the island nation alive. But in the freezing mists of the Baltic Sea, a nightmare has just woken up. It is not a U-boat, it is something far worse. It is a floating fortress, faster than a battleship and stronger than a cruiser. It is the HMS Bismarck. For the British Admiralty, the equation is terrifyingly simple. If this beast breaks out into the open Atlantic, the supply lines will be cut, Britain will starve. The war will be lost before the Americans even join. This is not a mission of conquest, it is a mission of survival. The order from London is clear, desperate, and absolute. Sink the Bismarck at any cost. But how do you hunt something that was built to be unsinkable? To understand the fear gripping the Royal Navy, we must look at the machine itself. Launched in Hamburg, the Bismarck represents the pinnacle of German naval engineering. Displacing over 50,000 tons when fully loaded, she is the largest warship commissioned in European history up to this point. Her main battery consists of 8 38-centimeter guns, capable of hurling an 800-kilogram shell over 36 kilometers with terrifying precision. But it is not just her firepower that makes her dangerous, it is her armor. The German engineers designed her to be virtually indestructible in a close-range brawl. Her turtleback armor scheme protects her vitals, making it nearly impossible for enemy shells to penetrate her machinery spaces or magazines at short combat distances. She is fast, too capable of reaching 30 knots, enough to outrun almost anything she cannot outgun. She is the apex predator of the ocean. The German plan, codenamed Operation Rheinübung, is audacious. The Bismarck, commanded by Admiral Günther Lütjens, is not sailing alone. She is accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. Their mission is not to engage the British home fleet directly, that would be suicide. Instead, their goal is to slip undetected through the Denmark Strait, the narrow passage of ice and fog between Iceland and Greenland, and break into the vast Atlantic. Once there, they will raid the merchant convoys, disappearing into the ocean like ghosts and striking where the British least expect it. However, the British have a vast network of spies and reconnaissance. On May 21st, a Spitfire reconnaissance plane flying over a Norwegian fjord spots something unusual. Through the breaks in the clouds, the pilot photographs 2 massive ships refueling. The intelligence is rushed to London. The beast is on the move. At the Royal Navy's base in Scapa Flow, Admiral Tovey knows he has very little time. If the Bismarck reaches the open ocean, it will take months to find her, and thousands of sailors will die in the process. He must intercept her at the doorway, the Denmark Strait. Tovey plays his strongest card. He dispatches the battlecruiser squadron, led by Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland. Leading the force is the HMS Hood. For 20 years, the Hood has been the pride of the Royal Navy, the most famous warship in the world. She is fast, elegant, and carries guns as powerful as the Bismarcks. Sailing with her is the brand new battleship, HMS Prince of Wales. But there is a fatal flaw in this matchup. The Hood was built in a different era. She is a battlecruiser, designed for speed, not for taking heavy hits. Her deck armor is dangerously thin. While the Bismarck is a modern tank, the Hood is a glass cannon. Admiral Holland knows this weakness, but he has no choice. The pride of the Royal Navy is sailing out to meet the terror of the Atlantic. The stage is set for the most dramatic duel in naval history. The date is May 24th, 1941. The sun rises over the Denmark Strait, but there is no warmth here, only a gray, freezing twilight sandwiched between the ice pack of Greenland and the cliffs of Iceland. The tension in the air is palpable, heavier than the fog that clings to the water. On the bridge of the HMS Hood, Vice Admiral Holland and his crew peer into the gloom. They know the enemy is close. They can feel the vibrations of the massive engines beneath their feet, driving the pride of the Royal Navy at full speed toward destiny. At 5:37 a.m., the silence is broken. The hydrophones pick up the rhythmic pounding of propellers. Then, visual contact. 2 dark silhouettes emerge against the ice. The Bismarck and the Prinz Eugen. The moment has arrived. Admiral Holland makes a critical decision. He orders his squadron to close the distance rapidly. He knows the Hood's weakness. Her thin deck armor is vulnerable to plunging fire shells that drop from high angles at long range. To survive, He must get close enough to force the German shells to hit his thick side armor instead. It is a race against geometry and physics. At 5:52 a.m., the order is given. The Hood's forward guns roar, sending tons of high explosives hurtling through the mist. But in the confusion of the low light, a fatal error is made. The lead German ship is actually the cruiser Prinz Eugen, which has a similar silhouette to the Bismarck. The Hood is firing at the wrong ship. On the Bismarck, the tension is equally suffocating. As shells splash dangerously close, Captain Lindemann grows impatient. He asks Admiral Lutyens for permission to return fire. Lutyens, strictly adhering to orders to avoid engagement if possible, hesitates. The British shells creep closer. Finally, Lindemann, unable to watch his ship take fire passively, reportedly snaps, "I will not let my ship be shot from under my ass." The order is given. Open fire. What follows is a display of terrifying German gunnery precision. The Prinz Eugen scores the first hit, starting a fire on the Hood's boat deck. The flames illuminate the British flagship, turning her into a perfect target in the dim light. Then, the Bismarck speaks. Her 15-inch guns thunder, sending a salvo that takes seconds to traverse the distance. At 6 a.m., the unthinkable happens. The Bismarck's fifth salvo finds its mark. It does not hit the side armor. It plunges down, slicing through the Hood's thin deck armor like a knife through paper. It penetrates deep into the bowels of the ship, straight into the aft magazines holding over 100 tons of cordite propellant. There is no sound at first, just a blinding pillar of fire that reaches hundreds of meters into the sky. Then comes the shockwave. The mighty Hood, the symbol of British naval power for 2 decades, is torn in half. The explosion is so violent, it vaporizes steel and men alike. Within 3 minutes, the stern rises vertically, and the ship slides beneath the icy waves. Out of a crew of 1,418 men, only 3 survive. The invincible legend is gone in the blink of an eye. The HMS Prince of Wales is now alone. The new battleship, still suffering from mechanical teething problems, maneuvers to avoid the wreck of the Hood, but finds herself in the crosshairs of both German ships. She takes multiple hits, her bridge is devastated, and her guns begin to malfunction. Realizing the fight is lost, her captain orders a smokescreen and retreats. The Battle of the Denmark Strait is over in less than 20 minutes. It is a tactical masterstroke for Germany, and a catastrophic humiliation for Britain. The Bismarck has done the impossible. But she did not escape unscathed. During the exchange, a shell from the Prince of Wales passed through the Bismarck's bow, severing a fuel line and contaminating her forward oil tanks. The beast is alive, and she has tasted blood, but she is bleeding. The hunter has become the hunted, and the entire Royal Navy is about to descend upon her with a vengeance fueled by grief and rage. The radio message that reached the Admiralty in London was brief, brutal, and almost impossible to believe. Hood has blown up. For Winston Churchill and the British War Cabinet, the loss was not just a strategic blow, it was a psychological catastrophe. The Hood was more than a ship. She was the embodiment of British imperial power, a floating symbol of invincibility that had graced postcards and newsreels for 20 years. To lose her in a matter of minutes to a single German ship was a national trauma. The shock wave of her destruction rippled out from the cold waters of the Denmark Strait to every corner of the British Isles. But shock quickly turned to a cold, hard rage. In the war room, Prime Minister Churchill issued an order that would become legendary, a directive that suspended all other priorities. Every available warship in the Atlantic, regardless of its current mission, was to drop everything and converge on the German battleship. Convoys were left unguarded. Destroyers running low on fuel were pushed to their limits. The command was simple and absolute: sink the Bismarck. It was no longer just a naval operation. It was an act of vengeance. The entire Royal Navy was now a pack of wolves, and they had caught the scent of blood. On board the Bismarck, the mood was a strange, unsettling mixture of euphoria and dread. They had just achieved the greatest naval victory in German history, sending the mighty Hood to the bottom. But Admiral Lutyens knew the celebration was premature. The beast was wounded. The shell from the Prince of Wales had done more damage than initially thought. It had severed a critical fuel line to the forward tanks and allowed 2,000 tons of seawater to flood the bow. The Bismarck was now down by the head, listing slightly to port, and leaving a betraying slick of oil in her wake. Lutyens faced a critical dilemma. His original mission was to raid supply convoys in the mid-Atlantic. But with his fuel reserves contaminated and his speed reduced to 28 knots, that mission was now impossible. He had two choices: return to Norway through the dangerous northern waters, or make a break for the German-occupied ports of France, where the dry docks of Strait-Nazaire could repair the giant. He chose France. It was a decision that would dictate the course of the next 3 days. He ordered the Prinz Eugen to break away and continue the raiding mission alone, while the wounded Bismarck turned southeast, straight into the jaws of the gathering British storm. Shadowing the Bismarck through the mist were the heavy cruisers HMS Suffolk and HMS Norfolk. They were the eyes of the fleet, using their radar to track the German giant through the fog and squalls. It was a terrifying game of cat and mouse. They had to stay close enough to keep contact, but far enough away to avoid the Bismarck's 15-inch guns, which could obliterate them in a single salvo. For hours, they stalked the wounded beast, broadcasting her position to every British ship in the ocean. Far to the south, the main body of the British home fleet, led by Admiral Tovey on the battleship King George V, was steaming hard to intercept, but they were still hundreds of miles away. Tovey knew that if the Bismarck maintained her current speed, she would reach the protection of the Luftwaffe's air cover off the French coast before his battleships could catch her. He needed something to slow her down. He needed to cripple her. His only hope lay with a force that had been hastily detached to join the hunt: the aircraft carrier, HMS Victorious. She was a new carrier, her air crews were inexperienced, and the weather was worsening by the hour. Yet, she carried a weapon that belonged to a different age, the Swordfish torpedo bomber. These were obsolete, slow-moving biplanes made of canvas and wire, nicknamed string bags. It seemed ludicrous to send these fragile antiques against the most heavily armored anti-aircraft fortress in the world. But as night fell over the Atlantic, the call went out to the young pilots on the Victorious. They were the only ones close enough to strike. The first attempt to hamstring the giant was about to begin. On the flight deck of the HMS Victorious, the scene is one of desperate improvisation. The Atlantic gale is howling, pitching the aircraft carrier violently in the swells. Lined up on the deck are 9 Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers. To the modern eye, they look like toys, fragile biplanes built of canvas, wood, and wire, with open cockpits that leave the crews exposed to the freezing spray. These string bags, as they are affectionately known, fly at a top speed of barely 100 miles per hour, slower than some cars on a modern highway. Yet, these relics of a bygone era are about to be thrown against the most technologically advanced warship on Earth. At 10 p.m., the order is given. One by one, the Swordfish struggle into the air, their engines straining against the wind. They disappear into the black clouds, guided only by primitive radar and the sheer courage of their pilots. They are hunting a giant in a storm. Shortly before midnight, the squadron leader spots a dark shape on the radar: the Bismarck. As the biplanes descend through the cloud layer to begin their attack run, the night sky erupts. The Bismarck's anti-aircraft batteries open fire. It is a wall of steel and fire, a spectacle that should have swatted the flimsy planes out of the sky instantly. But then, a strange anomaly occurs. The German fire control computers are too advanced for their own good. They are designed to track high-speed modern fighters. They cannot calculate the trajectory for aircraft flying this slowly. The flak shells burst harmlessly in front of the Swordfish, expecting them to be where they are not. The antiquated weakness of the string bags becomes their greatest armor. The pilots press the attack, flying steadily into the teeth of the guns. They drop their torpedoes into the churning water and bank away. Most miss, exploding harmlessly in the wake. But one finds its mark. A torpedo strikes the Bismarck amidships, squarely on her main armor belt. The explosion is massive, killing the first German sailor of the battle. But against the battleship's thick hide, it does little structural damage. The captain of the Bismarck reports only minor injuries to the ship. It seems the mosquito bite has failed to stop the Rhino. However, the attack has a hidden consequence. To evade the torpedoes, Captain Lindemann was forced to execute violent maneuvers at high speed. The stress of the sharp turns tiers opened the temporary repairs made to the fuel tanks damaged earlier by the Prince of Wales. The flooding in the bow worsens, and the ship settles deeper into the water. Crucially, The Bismarck is now bleeding oil faster than ever, and Lutyens is forced to reduce speed to conserve what little fuel remains. The beast is not crippled, but she is tired. Sensing the net tightening, Admiral Lutyens makes a bold move. In the darkness and confusion following the air attack, while the British shadowing cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk are zigzagging to avoid potential U-boat attacks, Lutyens orders a sharp turn to the west, looping back behind his pursuers. It is a classic evasive maneuver, executed perfectly. On the bridge of the HMS Suffolk, the radar operator stares at his screen. The rhythmic blip of the German battleship is gone. He sweeps the horizon. Nothing. He checks the equipment. Nothing. Panic begins to set in. The Bismarck has vanished. For the British Admiralty, this is the worst possible nightmare. They have committed every available asset to this hunt. They have left convoys defenseless and stripped the Atlantic of protection, all to catch this one ship, and now she has slipped away into the vast, empty ocean. If Lutyens can reach the safety of the French coast, the Bismarck will be repaired, refueled, and released again to wreak havoc. The hunters are now blind, and the Atlantic is a very big place to hide a battleship. The chase has gone cold, and the clock is ticking. May 25th, 1941. It is the morning of the long silence. For the British home fleet, the hunt has turned into a nightmare of frustration. The Bismarck has been missing for hours. The Atlantic is a vast, gray wilderness, and searching for a single ship without radar contact is mathematically impossible. Admiral Tovey, aboard the King George V, faces a grim reality. His battleships are burning fuel at a catastrophic rate. Soon, his destroyers will be forced to turn back to Iceland to refuel, leaving his capital ships vulnerable to U-boat attacks. The mood in the British war room is one of deepening despair. They begin to accept the terrifying possibility that the Bismarck has escaped and will soon be safe under the protective umbrella of the German Luftwaffe in France. But aboard the Bismarck, a different kind of psychological drama is unfolding. Admiral Lutyens is a man exhausted by days of high-stakes command. He is a rigid tactician, but he overestimates his enemy. Because the British radar had tracked him so effectively through the Denmark Strait, he becomes convinced that they are still watching him, that their radar technology is far superior to what it actually is. He does not realize that he has successfully shaken them off. He believes he is still surrounded by invisible eyes. Driven by this false belief, Lutyens makes the most fatal mistake of the entire operation. Thinking his position is already known to the enemy, he decides there is no harm in breaking radio silence. He sends a long, 30-minute message to the German High Command in Berlin, detailing his sinking of the Hood, the damage to his own ship, and his intent to reach the French port of St. Nazaire. He effectively hands the British a loaded gun. Across the British Isles, listening stations pick up the powerful transmission. Triangulation experts immediately begin plotting the source of the signal. The data is rushed to the Admiralty and then to Admiral Tovey at sea. The Bismarck has been found, not by eyes, but by ears. However, in the fog of war, tragedy nearly strikes the British again. A navigational officer on Tovey's flagship miscalculates the coordinates. For 7 agonizing hours, the entire British fleet steams in the wrong direction, chasing a ghost towards the North Sea, while the real Bismarck slips further southeast towards safety. It is not until late in the afternoon that the error is discovered, and the fleet turns around. But the damage is done. The Bismarck has gained a massive lead. She is now tantalizingly close to the safety of French air cover. The British battleships are too far behind to catch her before she reaches the protection of land-based bombers. The only hope lies with a fragile PBY Catalina flying boat, on loan from the Americans, patrolling the gray expanse through breaks in the clouds. On the morning of May 26th, the miracle happens. Ensign Leonard Smith, piloting the Catalina, spots a dark shape on the water below. He drops down to investigate and is immediately met with a storm of anti-aircraft fire. It is the Bismarck. The coordinates are radioed out. The needle in the haystack has been found. But finding her is not the same as stopping her. The calculations are grim. The Bismarck is less than a day's steaming from France. Tovey's battleships are too slow and too far away. There is only one force left on the chessboard that can intercept her in time. Force H, steaming north from Gibraltar, led by the aircraft carrier HMS Royal. The burden of saving the British Empire now falls on a second group of aviators. But this time, the stakes are absolute. If they fail to slow the Bismarck down before sunset, the German giant will reach the safety of the Luftwaffe by dawn, and the chase will be over. The final act of the tragedy is about to begin, and it will hinge on a single, lucky shot in a storm that is tossing the sea into mountains of foam. The Royal launches her swordfish into the gale. They are the last roll of the dice. The launch from the HMS Royal is nothing short of a suicide mission. The flight deck is pitching 50 feet up and down in the violent Atlantic swell. The wind is blowing at gale force, rain is lashing horizontally, and the cloud ceiling is dangerously low. Yet, 15 swordfish torpedo bombers manage to claw their way into the sky. They form up in the gray soup and turn towards the target, reported by the tracking cruiser, HMS Sheffield. But in the adrenaline and chaos of the storm, the fog of war descends. The radar operators on the lead aircraft pick up a ship. It is in the expected position. It is roughly the right size. Without visual confirmation through the thick cloud, the flight leader signals the attack. The swordfish dive, dropping their torpedoes into the churning water. It is a catastrophic mistake. The ship below them is not the Bismarck. It is the HMS Sheffield, their own cruiser, which had been shadowing the Germans and had not been informed of the air attack. The British pilots are attacking their own ship. On the bridge of the Sheffield, the captain watches in horror as the torpedo tracks race towards him. He orders the engine room to full emergency power, throwing the ship into a violent turn. But then, something strange happens. Several of the torpedoes explode prematurely upon hitting the water. Others detonate harmlessly in the cruiser's wake. The Sheffield miraculously survives unscathed. The pilots, horrified as they recognize the silhouette of the British cruiser below, break off the attack. A signal is flashed from the Sheffield to the apologetic air crews. Sorry for the kippers. This blunder should have been the end of the mission. Instead, it becomes the turning point of the entire war. The torpedoes used in the accidental attack were equipped with magnetic detonators, experimental devices designed to explode underneath a ship's hull. The failure of these detonators against the Sheffield proves to the air crews that they are useless in the rough seas. They are faulty. The swordfish return to the Royal, landing precariously on the heaving deck. The ground crews work feverishly in the freezing rain to rearm the planes. But this time, they swap the high-tech magnetic detonators for old-fashioned, simple contact detonators. They are going back to basics. If they hit the Bismarck, they want the torpedoes to explode on impact, not rely on a faulty sensor. At 7:10 p.m., the swordfish launch again. This is it. Darkness is falling. Fuel is low. There will be no third chance. They find the Bismarck just before sunset. The German battleship is ready. Her anti-aircraft batteries erupt, turning the sky into a kaleidoscope of black smoke and tracer fire. It is a wall of death that no slow-moving biplane should be able to penetrate. The turbulence from the exploding shells is so violent it tosses the light aircraft around like leaves in a hurricane. But the swordfish pilots, flying barely above the wave tops, press on with icy calm. They are flying so low that the Bismarck's heavy guns cannot depress enough to hit them, and the high-speed anti-aircraft tracking systems again fail to lock onto the slow targets. The planes approach from different angles, splitting the German defensive fire. Torpedoes drop. The pilots pull up, banking hard to escape the inferno. Most of the torpedoes miss or strike the Bismarck's heavy armor belt, causing no significant damage. The German crew begins to cheer. They have survived the onslaught. The French coast is close. Safety is within reach. But one torpedo, launched by a pilot named John Moffat, is running true. It does not hit the armor belt. It runs towards the stern, the most vulnerable part of the ship. It strikes the Bismarck on her starboard quarter. The explosion is not massive compared to the others, but the location is fatal. The warhead detonates directly against the steering gear compartment. The massive steel rudders, weighing tons, are jammed violently to the left. The explosion also wrecks the steering motors. On the bridge of the Bismarck, the helm suddenly stops responding. The ship begins to turn in a slow, agonizing circle. Captain Lindemann orders countersteering using the engines, but it is no use. The rudders are locked tight. The mighty Bismarck, the most powerful warship in the Atlantic, is no longer a predator. She is a cripple, steaming in circles, unable to hold a course, and she is turning directly back towards the British fleet. The beast has been hamstrung. Night falls over the Atlantic, but for the crew of the Bismarck, there will be no sleep. The giant is wounded. Her rudders are jammed fast at a 12-degree angle, locking her into a slow, endless turn to the northwest. She is no longer running for the safety of France. She is steaming directly towards her executioners. Sensing the kill, the British close in. But before the heavy battleships arrive, the pack moves in. A flotilla of 5 destroyers, led by Captain Philip Vienne, emerges from the darkness. These small ships are tossing like corks in the gale, often disappearing entirely beneath the waves, yet they attack with relentless ferocity. Throughout the freezing night, they play a deadly game of harassment. They dart in from the gloom, fire star shells to illuminate the crippled battleship, launch torpedoes, and then vanish back into the smoke. They are the wolves nipping at the heels of a dying bear. The Bismarck fights back, her secondary guns barking into the night, but she cannot hit the ghostly shapes in the storm. The constant alarms, the noise, and the violent motion of the ship drain the last reserves of energy from the German sailors. They are physically exhausted and psychologically broken. Inside the iron belly of the beast, the mood shifts from desperation to fatalism. Admiral Lütjens knows it is over. He composes a final message to Berlin. It is not a call for help, but a declaration of doom. Ship unmaneuverable. We will fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer. It is a message that seals the fate of over 2,000 men. Meanwhile, on the British battleships King George V and HMS Rodney, approaching from the north, the mood is cold and grim. Admiral Tovey has given the order to wait for dawn. He does not want a chaotic night battle where mistakes can happen. He wants a calculated execution in the light of day. The sailors rest by their guns, drinking cocoa and writing final letters home, knowing that tomorrow morning will bring an apocalypse of steel and fire. As the sun begins to rise on the morning of May 27th, the storm shows no sign of stopping. The gray light reveals the Bismarck, wallowing in the heavy seas, alone. She is battered, tired, and surrounded. The wolves have done their job. Now, the heavy hammers have arrived to finish it. The final duel is about to begin. The morning of May 27th brings no mercy. The sky is a sheet of lead, and the waves are still mountainous, washing over the decks of the British battleships as they plow through the swell. On the horizon, the silhouette of the Bismarck is clearly visible. She is moving erratically, dragging her stern, fighting the ocean as much as the enemy. She is a trapped animal, and the hunters have arrived to put her down. Facing her are the 2 executioners, Admiral Tovey's flagship, the King George V, and the HMS Rodney. The Rodney is a strange-looking beast, an older battleship with all her main guns concentrated forward. But those guns are 16-inch monsters, the heaviest weapons in the Royal Navy, capable of firing a shell the size of a car. She is the sledgehammer of the fleet. At 8:47 a.m., the Rodney opens fire. The sound is deafening, shaking the entire ship and shattering light bulbs in the mess decks. A minute later, the King George V joins the chorus. The final battle has begun. For a brief moment, the Bismarck shows her teeth. Her forward turrets roar back, sending salvos straddling the Rodney. Despite her wounds, her gunnery is still terrifyingly accurate. The first German shells land dangerously close to the British ship, sending geysers of water hundreds of feet into the air. If the Bismarck can score a lucky hit, she might still cripple one of her tormentors. But the odds are mathematically impossible. The Bismarck is unable to steer. Every time she fires, the recoil pushes her off course, ruining her aim for the next shot. She is fighting blind, and the British are closing the range relentlessly. They are not fighting a duel, they are conducting a demolition. At 8:54 a.m., the end begins. A 16-inch shell from the Rodney screams across the water and smashes into the Bismarck's forward superstructure. It is a catastrophic hit. The shell detonates on the bridge, instantly killing the entire command staff, likely including Admiral Lütjens and Captain Lindemann. In a split second, the brain of the beast is destroyed. With the central fire control director gone, the Bismarck's heavy guns lose their coordination. They begin to fire independently, ragged and inaccurate. The British battleships, realizing their enemy is effectively blinded, move in for the kill. They close to point-blank range distances so short that they cannot miss. What follows is not a battle, but a systematic dismantling of a masterpiece of engineering. Shell after shell slams into the German superstructure. The massive gun turrets, named Anton, Bruno, Caesar, and Dora, are knocked out one by one. Turret Anton is blown clean off its mountings by a direct hit. Turret Caesar is frozen in place, its barrel drooping like a broken arm. Fires rage, from bow to stern. The once pristine decks are a twisted jungle of steel. But incredibly, the Bismarck's main armor belt holds. The citadel remains intact. The engines are still running. The black flag still flies. The ship is a burning wreck, a floating graveyard, but she refuses to sink. This defiance frustrates Admiral Tovey. He orders his ships closer, into the very face of the burning giant. He wants to finish this quickly, but the unsinkable ship is living up to her name in the most horrific way possible. The shelling continues, turning the pride of the German Navy into a sponge of fire and steel. By 10 a.m., the Bismarck has ceased to be a fighting unit. She is a floating scrap heap, a burning island of twisted steel drifting in the Atlantic swell. All her main guns are silent. Her bridge has been obliterated. Her funnel is gone, and the superstructure is riddled with hundreds of holes. Inside the hull, the conditions are beyond the description of nightmares. The once proud crew is trapped in a steel coffin filled with smoke, fire, and rising water. Yet, incredibly, the ship refuses to die. The black flag still flies from the mainmast, a defiant signal that there will be no surrender. On the bridge of the King George V, Admiral Tovey watches the burning wreck with a mixture of professional admiration and desperate frustration. He has a new enemy now: fuel. After chasing the Bismarck at full speed for days, his battleships are running on fumes. If he stays any longer, he will not have enough oil to reach the safety of the British ports. He cannot afford to be stranded in U-boat-infested waters. He has fired over 700 heavy shells into the German ship, yet she still floats. The engineering quality of the Blohm and Voss shipyards is proving to be almost supernatural. At 10:15 a.m., Tovey makes the hard decision. He can do no more. He orders the battleships to cease fire and turn for home. As the King George V turns away, Tovey sends a final signal to the remaining ships. Any ship with torpedoes, close and sink her. It is the order for the coup de grace. The heavy cruiser HMS Dorsetshire moves in for the kill. She approaches the burning Leviathan cautiously, like a hunter approaching a wounded tiger that might still have one last strike left. But there is no reaction from the German ship. The Dorsetshire closes to within 2 miles, a suicidal distance in a normal battle, but now just a firing range. She launches 2 torpedoes into the Bismarck's starboard side. Then she circles around to the port side and fires another. The explosions shudder through the broken hull. But deep inside the ship, another story is unfolding, one that will be debated by historians for decades. German survivors would later testify that the order had already been given to scuttle the ship. Engineers, deep in the bowels of the vessel, were opening the sea valves and setting explosive charges to ensure the Bismarck would not fall into enemy hands. Whether it was the British torpedoes or the German scuttling charges that dealt the final blow, the result is the same. The beast's resistance is finally broken. Slowly, agonizingly, the Bismarck begins to roll over to port. The stern disappears first. The bow rises into the air, momentarily pausing as if gasping for a final breath. Then, with a terrifying groan of twisting metal, the 50,000-ton giant slides beneath the surface. It is 10:39 a.m. The terror of the Atlantic is gone. The silence that follows is sudden and absolute. The roar of the guns, which has dominated the morning, is replaced by the sound of the wind and the waves. On the surface, hundreds of German sailors are left struggling in the freezing oil-slicked water. The HMS Dorsetshire and the destroyer Maori move in to rescue the survivors. Ropes are thrown down. Men are hauled up the sides of the British ships. But the Atlantic has one final cruelty in store. As the rescue operation begins, a lookout on the Dorsetshire spots a suspicious trail of bubbles in the water. A periscope? A U-boat? The captain takes no chances. The order is given to cut the ropes and get underway immediately. The British ships accelerate away, leaving hundreds of screaming men behind in the freezing water. It is a brutal, heartbreaking decision, dictated by the ruthless logic of war. Out of a crew of over 2,200 men, only 114 will survive. The hunt is over, but the human tragedy is absolute. The guns are cold now. The Atlantic has reclaimed its silence. As the British fleet limps back to Scapa Flow and Gibraltar, the adrenaline fades, replaced by sheer exhaustion. Many of the pursuing ships are so low on fuel that they have to be towed into port. They have won, but it was a victory bought by the thinnest of margins. If the Bismarck had not been slowed by that single, lucky torpedo from a biplane, if the wind had shifted, if the German admiral had not broken radio silence, the history of the war at sea might have been written very differently. In London, the news is greeted with a collective exhale of relief, rather than jubilation. The Bismarck has been sunk, Churchill announces to the House of Commons. The nightmare is over. The lifeline to America is safe, at least from surface raiders. But in the quiet corners of the Admiralty, the naval officers mourn the loss of the HMS Hood and the thousands of men who died in the opening minutes of the chase. In Berlin, the reaction is one of shock and fury. Adolf Hitler, who was always skeptical of surface ships, loses all faith in his navy's capital vessels. He sees them now as expensive liabilities. From this moment on, the German surface fleet is effectively leashed. They will never again sortie into the Atlantic in force. The era of the great battleship duels is over. The war at sea shifts entirely to the U-boats, the silent, underwater killers that will plague the Allies for 4 more years. The destruction of the Bismarck did not end the Battle of the Atlantic, but it changed its nature forever. The human cost of this 9-day saga is staggering. On the HMS Hood, 1,415 men perished, only 3 survived. On the Bismarck, out of a crew of over 2,200, only 114 were pulled from the water. In total, nearly 3,500 sailors, some of the finest young men of their generation, were erased from existence in the freezing waters between Greenland and France. Today, the Bismarck lies in the dark, 4,800 meters down on the slopes of an underwater volcano. She sits upright, her guns still pointing at an enemy that is no longer there. When the wreck was discovered in 1989 by Dr. Robert Ballard, the same man who found the Titanic, the world saw that despite the pummeling she took, her hull was largely intact. She was not destroyed by the British shells. She was defeated by a combination of archaic biplanes, a jammed rudder, and the overwhelming numerical superiority of an empire that refused to yield. The story of the Bismarck is more than just a chronicle of naval tactics. It is a Greek tragedy played out on a stage of steel and ice. It is a story of hubris, the belief that any ship could be truly unsinkable. It serves as a grim reminder that in war, technology is powerful, but it is never invincible against the turning tides of fate and the sheer, stubborn will of human beings. The Iron Giant sleeps in the deep, a silent monument to the ferocity of the Battle of the Atlantic, and to the thousands of souls who serve as her eternal honor guard.